This PowerPoint presentation is to review or to actually talk about how to work with stem-changing verbs in Spanish. The stem-changing verbs do not conjugate the way we've been conjugating up to now because, as the name says, something about them is going to be different. The stem is going to actually change. That's not what we've done before with verbs. Every time we've conjugated, the stem has been the part that has remained the same. So as we go through the presentation, we'll talk about what that means. Okay, here's a beautiful picture of downtown Madrid. Just a quick little intro to a very beautiful cosmopolitan city. When we talked about conjugating before, we always were working with regular verbs, regular conjugating, which meant that we would find the stem of the verb and then we would add on endings. And in fact, when we worked with the verb hablar, the verb to talk, we would talk about a chart of endings that would be added to the stem so that you could work with this verb according to first person, second person, third person. And again, that part that we never changed was called the stem. That's how you work with regular conjugating. Now that we're moving into what are called stem changing verbs, just like the name says, the stem is going to change, but at least it is going to follow a pattern. It is not going to be totally random. Okay, the endings, however, they do not change. The endings are the endings. So if I'm working with an AR verb, I know I have a chart of endings to work with. Same thing with ER endings and IR endings. That doesn't change. It's only the stem that we're going to be making changes to. The pattern that we just kind of mentioned for the stem changing verbs is going to be predictable. And so that you know, there are really only 3 kinds of stem changes. So we're not talking about a lot of categories of changes. And the only way that you can remember to work with them is by memorizing the verbs. So that part you have to do. Now, here's an example of one. In class, you've probably heard me say, repite, por favor. And if you think about the pronunciation, repite, por favor, it comes from repetir. So looking at the stem of repetir, you can see what was happening. Instead of repete, por favor, it became repite, por favor. So the E did change. That's an example of a stem changing verb. So sometimes you've been hearing them a little bit without understanding what they were. Here are 3 categories of stem changing verbs. In this first grouping, these are the verbs in which an O inside of the stem will change into a UE when you conjugate. And so just to make sure that we have meanings, this first one, volver, means to return, like the players return to the field, volver. Poder means to be able. Sometimes in English we would say, I can. That's what we mean by be able. I'm able to, or I can. Dormir means to sleep. Very common verb. Devolver means to give back. And the last verb in this UE grouping, where inside the stem we're going to find a UE, is the verb jugar, where the U changes to a UE. And this is the verb that means to play. So we're going to use this a lot in our sports chapter. The E to IE stem change group. In this group, the E inside of the stem becomes becomes an IE spelling. Let's go through the meanings. Empezar and comenzar, they both mean to begin. And the verb querer, it means to want. The verb perder, to lose. The verb preferir, to prefer. And the verb sentir, to regret. And the last group is the smallest one. In this grouping, the E inside of the stem is going to change into an I. And this group includes repetir, which means to repeat. That's the one that you might hear in class sometimes, repite. The verb servir means to serve, like you might need in a restaurant situation. And the verb pedir means to request or to ask for. Those are the verbs we're going to mostly be working with, okay, in this chapter. So if we're looking at stem changing and we say that it occurs in a shoe shape, here is the conjugation of the verb to repeat, repetir, without the endings. So what you're looking at is, take away the IR, the part that's left is called the stem. And so when I look at what happened to the stem, I can see that in the spelling of the stem, the E that was in the original infinitive is changed into an I. And that happens in all of these forms that, if I can circle, looks a little bit, a circle that looks a little bit like a shoe. So that's why some texts will call these shoe verbs. I know, it looks more like a boot. But that's what happens to the stem, okay, with stem change verbs. So we said that the endings are not going to be the concern. That means because it's an IR verb, I know my IR verb endings. I can just put those on and conjugate through the way I would anyway. Okay, the endings are not tricky. The endings are what they are for IR verbs. So what I end up with is repito, repites, repite, repetimos, repetís, repiten, with an I stem change inside of all those forms. And here on the side is the conjugated verb. Okay, so the endings are normal, quote unquote. That means they do not have anything happening that you have to memorize. The only change that happens is inside the stem. So working with stem changing verbs, you have to remember that basically there are only three types. There's the O that turns into a UE, then there's the type where the E turns into an IE, and then there are a few where the E turns into an I, and that's only going to happen inside the shoe-shaped circle. So the ones that are outside of the shoe are not going to stem change. So first step, memorize them. You have to know which ones they are. So learn them by groups. Look at that UE group first, and then just go through them until you know which ones are UE. Okay, and then do the IE changes, and then do the I changes. So first step would be, of course, to find the stem, because that's how we conjugate. Change the vowel, and the vowel change depends on which group they were in, because you're learning them as three different kinds of stem changing groups. You'll make the change of that vowel in all of the forms, but not nosotros or vosotros. And then at least in your mind, outline the verbs that change so you can think about where the stem change occurs. It doesn't happen in the nosotros or the vosotros. To practice, we could look at the verb volver. That's in the UE stem changing list, and I know that because of studying and memorizing. So if I put the UE spelling in all the forms of volver, which is conjugated out, okay, by taking the stem, by getting rid of the ER. This is the stem. And then I change the O into a UE in all of these forms that are, at least in my mind, inside of this thing that looks like a shoe, to double check that I put them in the right forms. So I conjugate vuelvo, vuelves, vuelve, volvemos, volvéis, vuelven. Here is an example of an IE stem changing verb, the verb to regret, sentir. So if again I put that IE change in, all forms inside of that shoe shape in my mind when I'm conjugating. And remember, conjugating means thinking about the verb chart, and working with endings that show that it matches up with yo, tú, él, usted, nosotros, vosotros, ellos, ustedes. So my endings are there. And siento, sientes, siente, sentimos, sentís, sienten, with an IE stem change in those verb forms. So, vamos a contestar unas preguntas personales con los verbos. Let's try some personal questions. Remember, if it's a personal question, it's going to be directed right to you. And if you're going to give an answer, you're going to answer it in the first person. We do that all the time in English. Do you want to visit? Yes, I do. So in the response, we go from you to I. That's just a reminder. So if we try some. ¿Qué quieres visitar? So I'm looking at the to-form ending, and I'm looking at this stem, which comes from the verb querer, to want. This is in the to-form. So what do you want? Visitar, to visit. El Palacio Real o La Plaza Mayor. Those were your choices. We talked about these places in class today. So when you give your answer, You respond with the yo form. So you take that Q-U-I-E-R stem and put on the yo ending. And then the visitar just stays like that because to visit, that's the thing I want to do. I want to visit. I don't have to conjugate that one. Quiero visitar. And I make my choice. La Plaza Mayor. Prefieres, to form. Ir, to go. De dia o de noche. So again, in my response, I'm going to take that same verb that's conjugated, that's in the to form, and I'm going to make it a yo form conjugation. So I'll have that IE stem change and then put on the yo ending. Prefiero ir de noche. Puedes visitar el Museo del Prado también. So I'm going to look at puedes, and I can see that there's a UE stem right here with a to form ending. Visitar, the infinitive stays, and then I can give my answer. Sí, puedo. So there's my stem, and I'll put the O ending on. Visitar doesn't change. Puedo visitar el Museo del Prado. I'm able to visit the Museum of the Prado also. ¿Dónde prefieres comer con tus amigos? Same idea. I'm taking the prefieres verb and I'm going to copy that stem change as I switch the ending to the yo form. And then I leave the comer because I prefer to eat. I don't have to conjugate that. Con mis amigos en la casa botín. That will be my choice. Okay, and then if we practice conjugating according to the subject and looking at the verb lists, I would check out volver. There's the stem. I'll find it on the UE verb list. So I'm going to put a UE stem change in there. And then, because I'm talking about my family, I'll use a third person singular ending. And that would be my verb, okay? Mi familia vuelve a España. So go ahead and write down on a piece of paper, what would you do with the rest of these? You'll have to look back at the list and see what kind of a verb stem change you are working with. Is it a UE? Is it an IE? And then you can check yourself. The answers appear on the next slide. Here are the answers. So you see the UE stem change. In the nosotros, we don't see any change. We can see the IE. So you're checking yourself against, did you know to put the I when the I stem change verb list? There's only a couple of them in that list. And then another IE over here. Okay, so watch it a couple of times if you think you're still confused. But really, if you keep in mind that it takes a little bit of memorizing and that you can always use the shoe graphic, to think about where the forms change. Hopefully you catch on quickly. Okay, buenas noches. Hasta mañana.